In the summer of 2019, more than 2 million people RSVP'd to ambush Area 51.
Flying saucers have invaded our planet. Washington, London...
That July, the anonymous administrators of the Facebook meme page, Shitposting 'Cause I'm in Shambles, had teamed up with a Twitch video game streamer to launch an online event that invited folks to storm the base, adding, for good measure, if we Naruto run, we can move faster than their bullets. Let's see them aliens. For those who don't watch anime, that's a reference to an oft-memed style of running from the Japanese manga series Naruto. According to the event page, attendees were to show up outside the base at 3 a.m. September 20th. But as a disclaimer, the page ended with a quick note to the Govies who had also presumably tuned in, which reads, "Hello, U.S. government. This is a joke, and I do not actually intend to go ahead with this plan. I just thought it would be funny and get me some thumbsy-upsies on the internet. I'm not responsible if people decide to actually storm Area 51." Not everyone got the message.
Why are you out here?
Trying to find my home.
These folks are ready to find it.
Well, who doesn't love aliens?
In the remote Nevada desert, a pair of festivals is attracting sci-fi buffs from far and wide, ready for their own close encounter.
The event that came to be known as Alien Stock kicked off with a few thousand odd attendees. Some did really hope to see aliens, but most were just looking for a good party that never materialized.
We came out to see kind of the dumb people make a run for it. I like my freedom. It's 6 months in federal prison, and that doesn't sound like a good time.
Little was planned. No one stormed the base. But one guy did do a pretty good Naruto run.
And show. As our live report concluded, I saw a flash of a shadow race behind me. Within hours, the video was making the rounds. Everyone was talking about this guy in the live shot doing the Naruto run, a signature move referenced in the Storm Area 51.
I'm Lacey Healy, and this is Things That Go Boom, your friendly neighborhood national security podcast from Inkstick Media and PRX. Conspiracy theories are as old as time, and they're not all bad. Sometimes they bring us together for a subpar party in the desert.
It's like Halloween, but we're just annoying people.
But when they take a turn to the dark side, conspiracy theories can be as dangerous as any other threat we face. Today, we're going to talk about how the internet has fueled a rise in that dark side and how we can walk back from the brink.
What is actually going on with the economy nowadays? The price of gas? Inflation? Are we in a recession? I'm Jeff Guo, co-host of NPR's Planet Money. Come along with our super team of econ experts as we delve into the stories that show you how the world really works. That's Planet Money from NPR.
My name is Elizabeth Neumann. I have been in the Homeland Security field for 20 years, and most recently was the Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism and Threat Prevention at the Department of Homeland Security under the Trump administration.
Neumann says one of today's most well-known conspiracy theories, QAnon, was on her radar when she was in government. But it wasn't seen as a threat.
There's no deep state cabal that comes with knowledge, that comes with a Q clearance. It just, it was on its face so laughable that I think some of what has happened in the last year with QAnon took many of us by surprise.
But how is that possible? That this community that began in some of the seedier corners of the internet morphed into something that gained traction on mainstream social media platforms and managed not only to ride a few search engine algorithms all the way into the halls of Congress, but to take the government by surprise. Maybe because some of Q's conspiracy theories have been around for 30 years.
My name is Oumou Lee. I am currently a fellow at the Berkman Klein Center at the Harvard Law School, where I study and develop projects and programming around policy solutions to complex cybersecurity problems.
Lee says to understand today's rise in conspiracy theories, we have to go back to 1978.
Do you remember the Whitewater scandal?
When Bill and Hillary Clinton formed the Whitewater Development Corporation with James and Susan McDougal, planning to buy up 230 acres of riverfront land and sell it as lots for vacation homes.
Now, Thursday's Whitewater hearing,
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Alphonse D'Amato's committee
that it's a political agenda.
Everything that's happened to me has been so that I would tell some story that was not the truth about Bill or Hillary Clinton.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Susan McDougal,
not guilty of the crime of grand theft of person.
Is there a fundamental distrust of the Clintons in America?
Well, I hope not. I mean, that would be something that I would regret very much.
The fallout from the deal came to public attention in the 90s. This was right about the same time that hordes of AOL disks were popping up in mailboxes around the country, summoning Americans to join the internet. And during Bill Clinton's run as president, a federal Whitewater investigation conducted first by Robert B. Fisk and then ultimately by Kenneth Starr didn't turn up any involvement on the part of the Clintons. But it did turn up several other controversies, including, famously, Monica Lewinsky. And the whole thing became catnip for conspiracies already beginning to run wild on all of those brand new web pages and chat rooms.
I think the 1990s was sort of the first time we see organizing around disinformation in terms of media the way we do today, where there is a conservative or hyper-partisan media ecosphere that really has the goal of getting people to buy into alternate realities.
But if Whitewater was a bunch of meme and alien-loving kids looking for a party, today's conspiracies are the folks actually looking to break into Area 51 and drag the aliens out by their toes.
We don't exactly know who Q is, okay?
He's working for the president. He's working for our country.
Very cryptic. Now, of course, this could mean the Clinton Foundation, which once we heard the testimony, we realized they're screwed.
It's not a conspiracy. It's fact.
Clinton conspiracy theorists have been falsely accusing the couple of murder on the internet for almost 30 years. So it probably shouldn't come as much of a surprise that they're still doing it today. It's just that today, the media ecosystem has evolved. We don't just have a few chat rooms and badly designed websites to contend with. Today, Americans can self-select into information bubbles that reflect only one point of view, shutting out open debate. At the same time, entire industries have cropped up around spreading disinformation. And that disinformation, in turn, regularly seeps into our discourse.
And so you'll see really, really clear through lines between the narratives and topics and activity that happens online and what eventually ends up getting placed in mainstream media outlets. So those things working together create this silo of alternate reality where you not only have these certain beliefs that you can attribute to your own political predispositions, but they also work to align and really coalesce people around a shared ideology that may or may not be expressed explicitly within the group.
That pathway from blogs and Twitter up the chain to mainstream media is what led outlets like Fox News to spread unfounded conspiracy theories about the death of Democratic National Committee staffer Seth Rich for close to a year in 2016 and 2017, before ultimately a lawsuit led to a retraction and a seven-figure settlement with Rich's family. And while a good chunk of that disinformation we see bubbling up today is still coming from countries like Cuba, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Thailand, it's also coming from right here at home.
What's going on now is a complete deception. It's election fraud.
The so-called Stop the Steal campaign is just one example, and one that resulted in real-world consequences.
Here we go, they rushed in, man.
Beating and stomping and smashing him with a pole flying the American flag. D.C.'s acting police chief says it left him sick to his stomach.
While claims of voter fraud have been widely discredited, that didn't stop the storming of the Capitol on January 6th. And it hasn't stopped some, like businessman and Trump confidant Mike Lindell, the pillow guy, from continuing to appear in places like Newsmax in recent weeks to push lies.
Machines. We have 100% proof when they took it down about 3 weeks ago.
Mike, you're talking about machines that we at Newsmax have not.
Of course, there have been some legal and financial consequences. A recent defamation suit from the voting machine company Smartmatic targets Rudy Giuliani along with Fox News to the tune of $2.7 billion. A few lines from the brief include,
Fox is responsible for the disinformation campaign, which has damaged democracy worldwide in a
along with,
the earth is round, 2 + 2 = 4. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won the 2020 election for president and vice president.
But so far, tactics like fact-checking or labeling by platforms haven't made much of a dent. In fact, a recent study was unable to turn up any evidence that watching fact-checking videos made people less likely to spread disinformation. Rather than retreat when confronted, many folks dig deeper into their beliefs, meaning this problem could be less a result of mass delusion and more a result of mass mobilization.
We are definitely sort of at a tipping point, in my own opinion, where a significant amount of Americans first that believe in conspiracy theories, but that same share of Americans probably also distrust authoritative sources and don't know where to go for the best sources of information.
In large part, you could say that we were primed as Americans to question authority. And so we're, that's a strain of who we are. But to have such a large percentage of the population glom onto this, very, very concerning.
Combine that streak of American individualism and mistrust of government with a bad algorithm, and a person can fall down some dark holes of the internet, with plenty of baddies waiting to snatch them up.
And so I got under the table, and I pulled my mom. She was lying on the seat, and I was trying to pull her down.
When we come back, we'll talk about how white supremacists are using disinformation to fuel their cause. When Elizabeth Neumann started work at the Department of Homeland Security in 2017, white supremacy was near the top of a long list of concerns.
And what we were primarily concerned about was that there was just this reawakening of white supremacy in a way that we thought had either died off or they had been so shunned and not come out in public.
Part of that reawakening, she says, came during the Trump campaign in 2015.
He was giving voice to grievance that white supremacists aligned with. Some of the president's grievance would maybe be considered typical in the Republican Party because he did not couch it in politically correct language. He just was right out with it, fear-mongering about demographic changes in our country, about outsourcing jobs, about Hispanic invasions coming to take our jobs. All of that was very much in line with what a white supremacist viewpoint is.
But she says she wasn't working for the president. She was working for the country. So she didn't let the president's language deter her from doing her job. That is, until a very specific event made her question everything. On August 3rd, 2019, a 21-year-old man from Allen, Texas, walked into a Walmart in El Paso just before 10:40 a.m. and shot and killed 23 people.
Two mass shootings 13 hours apart, and new demands from so many in this country that our leaders do something, that they offer more than words.
Police believe a white nationalist and anti-immigrant manifesto, which described an attack in response to, quote, the Hispanic invasion of Texas, was written by the man responsible for the massacre. Words similar to those that Trump had used himself.
I sat through at least 2 meetings where I was told, it's fine for you to talk about this in terms of domestic terrorism, but we have to talk about this in terms of violence prevention. Now, it's very apparent to me that it was naive, but I was willing to offer benefit of the doubt that they hadn't seen the threat, they didn't understand the nature of the threat. I need to do a better job of educating them on the threat. But then when you come to this moment where you realize the president's own language ended up in a terrorist manifesto, and you are unwilling both to address the president himself helping aid and abet these domestic terrorists, and you're unwilling to call this threat out for what it is, that's a breaking point for me. I'm a security professional. My oath is to the Constitution, not to a person, not to a political party. And it was very apparent to me that they were not interested in keeping the country safe.
She decided then that she had to leave the department. The Southern Poverty Law Center has tracked racist movements in America for well over 30 years. It says white hate groups increased by 55% during the Trump era, hitting a record high of 1,020 before leveling off at 838 in 2020, still a historic high. And while the president himself undoubtedly helped to fuel that rise, Lee says it also has something to do with the media ecosphere that we talked about earlier.
Online spaces, particularly unmoderated online spaces, are really one of the key ways they're able to organize and really get their narratives out into the mainstream.
Social media, smaller blogs, and news sites that, importantly, don't just come right out and say, this is white supremacism, but instead look for buy-in on things that folks might already believe.
So if you are someone who believes, for instance, that America should not be a nation of immigrants and that we should limit immigration, there are nuggets to follow in what the blogs will write.
And the folks who organize these platforms are opportunistic. In the first month of the pandemic, for example, just as a lot of folks were hunkering down, spending a lot of time on the internet, a report from the London-based Institute for Strategic Dialogue showed that channels on the messaging app Telegram associated with white supremacy and racism grew by more than 6,000 users. And one white supremacist channel specifically focused on messaging related to COVID-19 grew from just 300 users to 2,700 in March alone. But how many of those people are just falling in with the wrong crowd on the internet? And how many would be willing to get violent? Neumann says solid numbers are difficult, and research on white extremism has historically been slim. But the recently published book, Hate in the Homeland, estimates that between 75 and 100,000 people inside the U.S. support white supremacist ideology. And some older studies have estimated that as many as half of those might be willing to use violence to overthrow American democracy, like what happened on January 6th.
This meets the definition of terrorism. You had individuals commit an act of violence in the name of trying to change literally a political outcome. They're trying to change the election. See a parallel with ISIS, who was trying to build their caliphate and invite people to their new society. I mean, that's what a white nationalist does when they're recruiting, is like, wouldn't it be great if our society was like this, rejecting pluralism, rejecting the idea that people with different viewpoints or look differently than us would live with us.
Neumann says her department watched groups like the Proud Boys go from a Eurocentric, male chauvinist drinking club with a penchant for starting fights to something much more serious. So serious that the Canadian government labeled the Proud Boys in early February a terrorist entity, putting them on the same footing as Al-Qaeda and ISIS, which made us wonder about this word, terrorism, and whether it's really the right one to use.
It is interesting that the Biden administration chose to use the term domestic violent extremism. That is a defined term in the intelligence community. We worked on it a couple of years ago. So I'm open to the argument as long as we create parity, because it's so clear from communities, the Muslim community in particular, that we're not equally applying the law.
Many in the Muslim community have come out to ask that we don't use the word terrorism to describe this type of violent extremism, since in the past, it's been used to unfairly target them and other people of color. Neumann says that's not the only lesson to be learned from the 20 years since the war on terror began.
One of the opportunities that Biden has at this particular moment is to bring in really smart people that have worked on the inside, people that have critiqued it from the outside. Now, you need the will of the people here, which is why I'm so concerned about this automatic false narrative that 74 million Americans that supported Donald Trump were terrorists. Like, nobody's saying that. But the fact that they're saying it in that echo chamber is going to immediately cause distrust and any sort of attempt at a good dialogue about what's best to protect our country. The best way to do that is almost like a commission style. Have smart people go away, not in the public eye, debate, come up with options, and then present those options in the public and explain to the public why, the pros and cons of the different options, and then let the Congress do their job. That's their job to vote up or down.
It's a conversation she says is long overdue.
Most of the statutes that are on the books that are pertaining to the challenges we face were all written before the internet existed. Because we refuse to do the hard work of having these tough conversations and having rigorous debate over how to handle the threat.
Neumann says that right now, she's working with the Republican Accountability Project, a group that's putting up tens of millions of dollars in campaign support for any GOP members of Congress who voted to convict Donald Trump in the second impeachment. She says lawmakers, particularly on that side of the aisle, need to step up and tell the truth.
I would hope that Republicans in particular would see the moment that they're in not through a political lens, but through a security lens. That it is really, really important for them to clearly articulate that the election was not stolen and that they were lied to. You have a responsibility to go back to those constituents, to go on Fox News and say, you know what, here's what I knew when I knew it, and I wasn't telling you the full truth, and I'm sorry. Yeah, that's a hard thing to do, but you're supposed to be statesmen, not politicians. So I think accountability and a change happening within the Republican community itself That is probably the most important thing that we could do to shrink the level of the threat. Now, that does not take care of the hardcore white supremacist or the hardcore militia movement. But right now we're in this very dangerous space where people associated with and angry about the election could easily be recruited into those movements.
She says that cutting off disinformation from elected leaders can help shrink that pool of vulnerable people and allow law enforcement to focus on those who are truly dangerous. And one way they might do that is through anti-radicalization efforts. Though it's worth noting that a number of studies have cast doubt on the effectiveness of these types of programs.
Prevention's hard because everybody wants to say, show me the proof that you prevented the attack from happening. And you can't prove a negative by logical definition. So you can say that we off-ramp 40 individuals, but I don't know, were all 40 of them actually going to go out and do something? We don't know.
Neumann says these efforts also need to be coupled with a way for police to refer people to anti-radicalization programs or other social services before something happens.
And that's the problem we're trying to solve. Usually the people that commit attacks, people in their life can tell something is wrong and something bad is about to happen. We want to create the environment in every city and every county in this country where there is a safe place that you can turn and get that person help to the extent possible.
Part of breaking the threat of domestic terrorism will also involve building collaboration around disinformation. Preparing government agencies and news organizations now to respond to a major disinformation event in the future is extremely important. But ultimately, Lee says, we all have to take a hard look in the mirror and ask ourselves what we want a post-disinformation world to look like.
What sorts of regulatory measures do we want to see, and how does that sort of rub up against the First Amendment? And how can our understanding of the First Amendment be a little bit more nuanced to allow for better conversation around regulation? What does it look like for Americans to be able to engage in debate on a basis of facts in a way that really is informed by all of the nuance of particular issues that we're discussing? At a very macro level, there is, I think, a lost understanding of the fact that we live in a society. And in a society, it's okay, to have differing views, but just because you have a different view for me and your view is not based in fact, it doesn't make our views equally valid. It is okay to prescribe value or not value to things based on their truth.
After all, this problem is really about us.
When disinformation takes root in a country, in a society, or in a more localized way, it already speaks volumes about the democratic resilience of whatever we're talking about. That we have this information problem really speaks to the fact that there are deep, deep, deep divides in the country, deep wounds among people who distrust each other in civil society, deep distrust between government and people. And it's unfortunate that our own leaders now find that something that's advantageous to exploit.
Neumann cautioned that we can't keep turning a blind eye to what's happening in our country.
I put myself in this category. On Facebook, as people ranted online, I just kind of let them rant and be like, okay, we disagree. Well, you know what? I needed to have lovingly spoken out and said, I think that's wrong and here's why. And they might not have listened to me. What you need to do is insert doubt into the echo chamber. And the best people to do that are those that have connection with those that are lost, that love them and show that empathy. And that's how we help people get back on that pathway towards health.
Things That Go Boom is produced by Inkstick Media and distributed by PRX. This episode was produced by Rob St. Mary and me. It was edited by Ruth Morris, John Barth, and Layla Ujali. Darian Schulman writes the music for our show, and Robin Wise makes everything sound shiny and new. Thank you, as always, to the foundations that make our work possible, the Carnegie Corporation of New York and Plowshares Fund, as well as Inkstick supporters, including the Coulomb Foundation, Craig Newmark Foundation, Prospect Hill Foundation, and the Juvitz Family Foundation. And thank you to all of you for supporting our show. If you want to check out more of what we do, visit us on social at Inkstick Media. And we'll see you right back here in 2 weeks.
Elixir says he's made the trip to Rachel, Nevada mere miles from the infamous and top secret military base known as Area 51 before, and he was prepared for anything.
Yeah, we filled up the car with food, a lot of water, and hopefully I capture some aliens.
From PRX.